Hello, welcome to another How to Code Well YouTube video. My name is Peter Fisher, and today I would like to focus on web frameworks, the good parts and the bad parts, why you should use a framework and why you shouldn't use a framework. So I'm going to split this video into two. The first is why I think frameworks are bad in certain circumstances, and the second half is why I think they're brilliant in certain circumstances. So let's focus on the bad stuff first. Let's get that out of the way. So I think it's a bad idea to use a web framework to develop your website or a website or your client's website if you have not learned the language. I guess that goes without saying, right? You need to learn the language before you learn the framework. Now that might seem common sense to everybody, but believe you me, there are devs out there who are starting and all they care about is building in WordPress or building in Symfony. It's mostly WordPress for some reason, and Drupal that I've found. They don't care about anything else. They don't care about the actual PHP, the fundamental foundation in which the language is written in. And they see that the learning the framework is like a catalyst to learning the language. So that doesn't really fly with me very well because it's my opinion that you need to understand the fundamentals of not only the language but also the good practices, the concepts of what makes up a framework. So understanding what MVC is, understanding how to use templating engines, and understanding that that you should structure your code in such a way that you've got a distinction between the functionality, the form, so that's the template side, the look and feel, as well as the data abstraction, the validation, the security. Okay, and it's my opinion that anybody or everybody who is starting out as a web developer, they should roll their own framework first. Okay, and by doing so, you have an opportunity to learn how a framework works. Okay, so you understand the difference between creating files specifically for the template, for how the website looks, as well as writing stuff for how the data is handled, how the requests are handled, how the responses are handled, and then writing stuff for saving and fetching that information in a data source. So I guess what I've explained there is basically a model controlled view. Okay, but you need to understand how the fundamentals of that work, and the only way I feel, apart, you can read books on it, yeah, fine, but roll your own. Understand how these things are put together and hang together, and do it in a sort of safe environment, so a low risk environment. So for example, if you're just creating something for your school project or uni or something like that, don't just say, okay, I'm going to build it in WordPress, because if you don't know the language, then you'll find later down the line that you'll get stuck, right? If you and it'll become more difficult to maintain because and extend. In the paid professional world, if you just know a framework and you don't fully understand or appreciate the language behind that framework, then when your client comes to you and says that he needs to import a lot of information, or he needs to extend it in such a way that kind of you need to bend the will of the framework to the client's needs, you're going to find it very difficult to do that. So that's the first thing, and that is learning the language first before taking on a framework. If you really truly want to be a web developer, then you need to have an appreciation and some level of understanding of the fundamentals, both of the concepts in a framework, as well as just the code, right? So so you know, you need to get your teeth into that. Build yourself a framework, just something really small, something really simple, and it could just be a bunch of includes, right? PHP includes, but at least you're including it. At least you're understanding the difference between include once and require once, or include and require. You know, big difference between all of that stuff. And you wouldn't know that if you just focused on the framework, because everything else is done for you. You wouldn't have any understanding of auto loading, for example, or namespaces, because all of that is handled for you, right? If you're a web developer and you just install WordPress and then think that developing a website is literally just clicking buttons within the WordPress administration section, then you're going to have problems later down the line when someone asks you to build something in another framework, or build a script that imports that stuff in, or if they need a plugin, or if their theme needs to be updated. If your idea of just web development is just clicking buttons in a GUI, right, then that's pretty bad. So that's the first one, learn the basics. The second one is you need to be honest with yourself. You need to take a step back and go, do I really need a framework to do what the client requires of me? And the only way of knowing that is like I said in my previous video of what defines a good web developer, that is understanding the business needs, understanding the user's needs. Okay, there's no point in attaching or using a heavyweight framework, or just a framework, on a 5-page brochure site. If the website is just 5 pages, flat HTML, might have a contact form, but that might be the most complicated part of that. Okay, so the contact form could be saved through a database, or it could be saved through, or it could just send you an email, right? So you just use the PHP mail function. Yes, WordPress can do all that, fine, but the problem is that if the website, if you ask the client, and you need to ask the client, how often are you going to update this this website? How often do you need to change the content of this website? And if he or she comes back and says to you, oh, I don't think it's going to be updated any more than once a month or once a quarter, then you can come away and say, well, you don't necessarily need a content management system, so you don't need something like WordPress. You don't need you don't need a level of security that, say, Symfony or Laravel can provide. So you don't need that. So I can produce you this piece of this work quicker and more efficiently by just writing just a flat website. The most complicated thing will be the contact form. And later down the road, he might say, okay, well, actually, I want to update it. Or perhaps say, like in half a year's time, when it comes to Christmas, he wants to put a Christmas theme on. So all you're doing is changing the CSS. Again, you don't need a framework to do that. Now, if you took the stance of either not having that conversation with a client, or if you go into that meeting thinking it's going to be WordPress because that's all I know, and regardless of what the requirements are, I'm going to do it in WordPress, right? You might find that you are spending more time updating the framework because a security patch has been released than you are actually updating the content on the web, on the actual website itself. Yeah, and if you find that you're doing that, then there's obviously a problem with your understanding of what the client needs, what the business needs. So they're the two fundamental reasons why I think web frameworks are bad smells. So that's not understanding the concepts and the fundamentals of the language that the framework is built in, and the second one is like I said, using, say, giving them a big toolbox when all they need is a hammer or a screwdriver, they only need one tool, and that's you developing them a flat website, and you've given them something that can be all singing, all dancing, then you haven't understood the business needs. Okay, so that's the bad smells, okay, of web frameworks. Let's talk about the good stuff. Let's talk about why I think frameworks are awesome. Now, I've used frameworks for a very long time, okay? So my favorite is Symfony and Laravel. That might not be the same next year, perhaps. Could be something else. I've got experience in Cake PHP, Code Igniter. I like I said, my favorite is Symfony at the moment. But put me in front of a framework, as long as it's built in PHP, then I'll find my way around it, you know. And I guess that goes back to the first point I made, that you need to understand the language first. It's because I learned PHP. I learned how object orientation. I took a load of courses for that, so I'm confident and comfortable that I could, you know, take a look at something and understand how it all fits together in the PHP world. So a lot of people go, I'm not going to use this framework because that means that we're reliant on that person or that team of people to distribute the security patches, update the framework, and so forth. But have you ever heard of the saying, standing on the shoulders of giants? These people, and they are probably in their hundreds. Okay, so you're one developer, and there are a lot of them. If there is a bug, they will find it and they will fix it. Hopefully, there is that, you know, that caveat of hopefully. But they have produced something that adheres a lot of the time to good practices, and they are actually part of. Some of them are actually on the committees or members of the I guess organisations that actually create these good practices. So they're deciding the future of frameworks within PHP. So I'm talking about people on the PSR board, yeah. So the standardization of PHP and so forth. Plus, when you've got things like Composer and Composer is the way forward for dependency injection. But things like Composer will allow you to pull components from other frameworks in. Okay, so don't just think, oh, I'm working on Laravel, so I'm just stuck on Laravel, or don't just think, oh, I'm working on Drupal, so I'm stuck with Drupal. No, a lot of people who contribute to Symfony components and stuff like that their work is actually inside of Drupal, inside of Laravel, because they depend on those dependencies, right? So those dependencies are injected into those frameworks. So not only are you getting the best from Drupal or the best from Laravel, but you're also getting, you know, the snippets here and there from Symfony. For example, the routing, Symfony routing can be used in other frameworks quite easily. And Composer has really taken off in that, and has allowed that to happen very easily. And all you have to do is just change one composer.json file, and then update, and then there you go, you've got that thing. So that brings me on to my next point, and that's rapid deployment. So you can literally write a single Composer file, depends on all of these packages and their version numbers. Run a single command, and you've got something to play with, to configure, and it's rapid. So this buzzword RAD, so rapid application development, comes from frameworks. You can put something together quite quickly. That is a massive contradiction to what I was saying earlier as to why you shouldn't be using frameworks. But when you're in the when you're in the professional environment, when people are actually paying you for your time, then, and you're already working on PHP, which is open source, then you might as well use the things that the community have already created, tried and tested. Okay, so the argument of we shouldn't rely on these frameworks because they can be insecure, or we're reliant on them to update, fix and patch and all that stuff. Yeah, I do take that on board, and you need to have that conversation with the client. You need to let the client know that the work that you're doing is actually sat on top of the back of a lot of other people's code, okay? And you can't 100% guarantee that that's going to be, work all of the time. So you can mitigate that risk by writing unit tests and functional tests, integration tests, fine. But you need to have that conversation with your client. You can either roll it on your own, or you can use this thing and it's going to take you half the time, right? Less, probably. And the client might come back and say, yeah, we require it, that you need to roll it on your own because of XYZ reason. It's usually security. And that's fine, go with that, but still have that conversation, right? Because if you can get away with using a framework, if you can get away with using these packages that have already been tried and tested, then do so, because it's going to make your life a lot easier. And so I really wanted to use that Composer bit as the shareability aspect of why I think frameworks are good, and that's really come about with Composer. You had the shareability-ish with Pair, but it was a bit sort of very difficult. It was a challenge to use, whereas with Composer it's just dead simple. And so that barrier of that steep learning curve has gone. And also you can feed that into your deployment scripts, which it's just, in my opinion, it's just a beautiful way of deploying. If you're saying that your framework, your website requires these versions, and you are defiant in what versions that your website requires, then there's no need to push the whole website up to the server, which could have thousands of files. All you need to do is push that one Composer .log file up, run Composer install, and then let the server do all the hard work for you. So you're not actually having to package up the whole thing, right, and push it over. You can just say, this is the one file, it's going to have these versions in it. You can even go as granular as it's going to have this git commit in it, so you can do it by commits, which is just awesome. And you are comfortable and confident that what gets deployed is what you're expecting. So the shareability is great. Good practices as well. I touched on the standardization. These guys do the code in really good practices. You can take that away and learn from that. And stability, that comes off the back of that too. So a lot of the time when there is a problem or a bug, they'll fix it and they'll patch it and it'll go and you'll get it. A lot of these frameworks, Symfony, for example, have LTS releases, so long time LTS, long-term support. There we are. It's been a long day. Long-term support, and basically what that means is that whatever they produce and commit to that branch or to that tag or whatever won't have backwards compatibility breaks, BC breaks, because it's supporting that version for the long term. right? So there's no issues with there's no risk in updating the code and then everything going wrong. Obviously, though, keep your testing going. But that's about it, really, in my opinion, of why I think frameworks are bad in some circumstances and good in others. So that's my rant over. Thanks for watching, and I shall speak to you soon. Thanks. Bye.